The Michigan Court of Appeals, in a 2-1 ruling last Wednesday, overturned one man's conviction and states that the MMMA trumps illegal marijuana transport and other inconsistent laws. In other words, if you're a card-carrying patient or caregiver in compliance with the MMMA, you have a right to carry your medicine in the car instead of in this locked case in the trunk. It's a misinterpretation that until Wednesday had cost many Michigan drivers, med card holders and whatnot, fines and even misdemeanor convictions. In this case, the defendant's name is Callenlatz. He was pulled over after a concert in 2014. He was arrested for having a amount of pot in his car that was not even illegal because of his car, medical marijuana card. And he also had his service dog taken to the pound when they arrested him. And then when he went to jail, the deputies apparently released some information about his health when they announced his health out loud, or something to do with his health condition. His attorney's name is Josh Covert, and he says he called the illegal marijuana transport law that got him arrested predatory. The lawmakers in Michigan passed this law in 2012, 4 years after a majority of voters in every county statewide passed the MMMA. Through ignorance of the law is no defense. A lot of people got caught up in this and they didn't know about it, because it's not mentioned in the original law that was passed in 2008. Covert said in a statement, "For the most part, I think the rights of people have been trampled on, especially by the legislature where they created this act, like the improper transport statute. They didn't bother to put it in the Medical Marijuana Act where people would actually have the cards, who actually have the cards would see it. It seems to be somewhat a law by trickery where they're hiding it somewhere else where people wouldn't even know where to go." Wednesday's Court of Appeals ruling overturned Latz's misdemeanor conviction. His lawyer believes anyone who pleaded guilty to an illegal transport in the last 6 months or those with pending cases now have a viable defense. Again, the ruling sets the precedent that the MMMA overrules improper transport and states if another statute is inconsistent with the MMMA, such as it punishes the proper use of medical marijuana, the MMMA controls, and the person properly using the medical marijuana is immune from punishment. The rule goes on to state, thus, MCL 750.474, illegal marijuana transport, clearly subjects persons in compliance with the MMMA to prosecution despite that compliance, and it is therefore impermissible because illegal marijuana transport is not part of the MMMA. Defendant, as a compliant medical marijuana patient, cannot be prosecuted for violating it. His lawyer said, "I like what the Court of Appeals did in this. I think it's a step in the right direction, but I think it's like a Band-Aid over a bigger problem. And that is the legislator, along with the judges and the prosecuting attorneys, seem to ignore the intent of the law," said Covert. And I'll go a step farther and just say, the intent of the law was that if someone was using medical marijuana or using marijuana for medicine, then they're immune from prosecution. And there's limits and there's like a little bit of restrictions here and there. But if you have the amount of marijuana that you're allowed to have by law, it shouldn't matter where you transport it. I mean, this whole idea that just because it's sitting right next to you on the seat, that you're going to reach over and, indulge in so much of it that you're going to get in a car wreck or something, or like just it being there is going to be a distraction, is absurd and ridiculous. And I believe he's right about this and these other laws that it seems like they keep doing, or these things they keep saying. Like you can roll it all the way back to when the Attorney General Schuette was caught saying, well, if you pull someone over, you have to confiscate their marijuana because it's still against federal law. So we would be breaking federal law if we didn't confiscate the marijuana. Now that's just absurd. You have to be operating within reason. And what a lot of these police forces, prosecuting bodies, judges, And even the legislator thinks that they can do is read the law and then use that against caregivers and patients. And quite frankly, I don't understand why they think they're doing this. Like, they think that they're stopping someone who's breaking the law. I think there's a big problem right now, and I heard a quote from somebody from a police agency, because Fox 17, that's who I got this article from. They tried to contact the Clinton County Prosecutor's Office, who prosecuted Mr. Latz, and they didn't get anything. They have yet to hear anything back. Now, Mr. Latz is moving forward with his life, but he also wants to make sure nobody else has to suffer through this. So he has put together a class action lawsuits for others affected by this illegal transport move. He's asking others who know how to take the next steps to contact him. And if you know anybody that has been affected by this law or has a current case pending because of this illegal transport, like, oh no, you didn't have your weed in a box locked up in the trunk, so we're gonna give you a ticket. And, this happened to me. I was in Detroit and I drove by some police, and it was in a box in the trunk. It wasn't locked. And they tried to give me a ticket still because it wasn't locked or whatever. And the bottom line is I went to court and I ended up beating the ticket because the police didn't even show up. So I was ready to fight it. Didn't know what was going to happen, but I can afford maybe to get a little misdemeanor charge. But I really wanted to just see what was going to happen. And the judge basically was threatening me and all that, but they couldn't do nothing because there is no law to prosecute somebody for something as mundane as having something in the right location, which in the 2014 law said the trunk, but it wasn't in a proper box because the box didn't have a lock on it or whatever. Now, this is just insanity. Like, you want to talk about regulations, and these are all Republicans that are putting these regulations out there, believe it. And, the Republicans are supposed to be the people that are for the business people, and they're supposed to hate regulations. Well, these regulations are way intense. They're way too stringent. And it's the only industry I know of where if you miss your regulation, if you're off by a little bit, here comes the cops kicking in your door and arresting everybody at gunpoint and seizing all your property. Michigan has the worst forfeiture laws that I know of, and they're banking on the ability to write these laws like this one and others to just try to basically work their way around the law or use the law as a regulatory framework to put people in jail and to seize their property. Now, how does this ruling affect the new laws that were just passed? And a lot of these new laws went into effect on December 20th, such as the medibles and the edibles and dispensary licensing and stuff. Now, the thing about it is you still can't get a license for a dispensary until next year. But the good news there is there is actually things happening in that vein. But, when it comes to the transporting, again, this is for caregivers and patients that are within the caregiver-patient model, which isn't going anywhere. It will require a 75% supermajority in all houses and get signed by the governor to repeal the Medical Marijuana Act that we passed in 2008, and it's just not going to happen. The Michigan Medical Marijuana Act is here to stay. These new laws, these new marijuana facilities laws are not going to affect it at all. Now, in that law, there is this thing called marijuana transporters. And I guess it's going to be like this thing that they set up where these people come and pick up your marijuana and drive it around town for you in like an armored car or something like that. This doesn't have nothing to do with that, all right? This doesn't have anything to do with that. The people that run those marijuana facilities won't have caregiver cards. They'll have business licenses that tell them that they can either grow or whatever it is, processors, growers, testers. They'll have them kind of licenses. They won't have caregiver licenses. So they can call the transporter up, and the transporter can come and pick their stuff up and take it wherever. Now, they still haven't said anything about caregivers being allowed to test their marijuana and sell their overage at these facilities. I think somebody needs to do something about that. Because right now, caregivers with extra marijuana over the amount that they're allowed to have are still subject to prosecution or arrest, or whatever, just scrutiny in general, because of not having any outlet to get rid of the overage. And that includes extra plant material that you might have. You might have extra clones, or you might have extra trim. And all these things are counted and added up, and they use these arbitrary numbers that they have in these laws. And instead of like a normal regulatory system where you might get a penalty that's like a little fine or something, breaking these regulations could land you in prison, technically, if your numbers are off, and if it's, maybe it could, maybe it couldn't, I don't know. I wouldn't want to have to be like scrambling around and getting lawyers to try to figure it out. So another good, step in the right direction. And how does this affect other things in the law or the new law or whatever? It's just a good thing to have a ruling that says, hey, you can't just make up stuff as you go along if we already don't have, if we already have provisions for people being compliant laid out. You can't create new provisions for compliance. And it's just, it's not the way it works. So, just, again, it's the legislator scrambling to try to make it so that in the future, they know they're out. They're out of the game. Marijuana is going to be legal, and they're just doing whatever they can to get whatever they can out of their prohibitionary, oppressionary tactics of arresting people for marijuana. And now they don't have this stupid, oh, you had your weed in the wrong place, you're coming with me. I mean, it's just it's the most absurd thing, probably one of the most absurd things that they've done since the law was passed. And I'm glad to see it got shut down.